Right. Wonderful. Okay, so next slide. There we go. So what are we doing tonight? We anticipate that the session's going to run about an hour and a half. It depends a little bit on how many questions people have. But we're going to begin with a bit of a presentation, and that should last about 45 minutes with some breaks in there. First, we're going to talk a little bit about what rain gardens are, because maybe not everyone here is familiar with what they are, and that's why you're here to learn. So we're going to start with that and talk a little bit about why they matter. Why are we running this program in the first place? What's their purpose? We'll take a bit of a break at that point and take any sort of initial questions that people have. And then Curtis and I are going to give you a bit of an introduction to the Rain Garden Subsidy program specifically, and talk a bit about what's involved, what makes people eligible, and sort of walk you through some of the major steps in applying for a subsidy. And then what we're going to do is focus, sort of zero in a little bit on the first stage of the Rain Garden Subsidy Program application, the pre-application stage, and sort of walk you through each of those sub-steps in a little more detail. And then at the very end, we're going to have another Q&A period where we can chat further. All right. So what are rain gardens? Rain gardens, first and foremost, are a functional garden, and in particular they are functioned to take in water off of hard surfaces, so what we might call impermeable surfaces, and that can be a variety of things. That could be driveways, it could be roofs, it could be a pathway, a sidewalk, it could be any number of hard sort of paved surfaces. And in order to fulfill that function, all of them have certain common features. And so one of those common features is that they are bowl-shaped. And so the arrow here is pointing towards sort of a lower part in this particular garden, where you can see some gravel and some rocks. And that's the sort of lower bowl portion of this garden. And that is so that they can actually collect that water. We'll talk a little bit more in a few minutes about why that's important and why that matters, but that bowl helps collect the water. Each of them, all rain gardens, also have an inlet of sorts. And so the inlet is just the place where the water enters the garden from whatever hard surface it is coming from. And that might be directly next to the garden, or it might be sort of sent there through piping of some kind as well. So that's the inlet. And finally, all rain gardens need an outlet. And so the outlet is really a safety valve. It's, if you get so much water that is coming into your garden at once, you don't want it necessarily to overflow its edges and go any which way and cause harm. And so you create an outlet that's lower than an inlet where that excess water can safely be released. And for now, that's all I'm going to say about the actual sort of technical structure of rain gardens. We'll talk about that in more detail, particularly at our next design workshop. But for now, all you need to know is that rain gardens are bowl-shaped gardens that take in water from hard surfaces and have an inlet and outlet. Despite these commonalities, rain gardens can look wildly different. They can take many different sort of shapes and sizes and forms. So for instance, rain gardens can be quite large, like the example you see here on the left. That rain garden, I can't remember the exact dimensions, but it's roughly 35 feet in length. It's quite big. Or it can be quite small, like the one that you see on the right behind this back deck balcony. Similarly, rain gardens can include all different kinds of plant materials. So they can include flowers, they can include grasses, they can include shrubs or even trees. It doesn't mean necessarily that any plant is appropriate for a rain garden, and we'll talk more about that as well in the second workshop. But there are a lot of options. Many rain gardens you'll also see include sort of rock, like river rock or gravel, things like that. That can play a really functional role in sort of slowing water down and preventing erosion as it enters rain gardens. But oftentimes it's also just aesthetic. A lot of people will put rock in rain gardens because they like how it looks. All right. When we talk about rain gardens, I think for a lot of people, what comes to mind are gardens that are highly naturalistic in style. So gardens that have a lot of wildflowers, a lot of native plants potentially, and have that kind of meadowy type look. And that is entirely possible and great if that's the aesthetic that you enjoy. But I also wanted to point out that rain gardens can actually be designed in many different ways, and they can be formal, and they can have many different aesthetics. So an example here that I was able to find from a landscape architect in the GTA, Adele Pierre. This is an example of a much more formal looking garden in front of an absolutely stunning Art Deco house, wherever that is. And so you can see the sort of range that exists here. So no matter your stylistic preferences, I guess is what I'm trying to say, there is a rain garden for you. And you just have to be creative about what you want and how you want to design it. I'm going to go on in a second to talk a little bit about why rain gardens matter, but I do encourage everyone after this to go online, do some searching on Google or Pinterest or whatever, search for rain gardens, and you can really start to see the variety that exists, and it can be a really great inspiration as you start thinking about your own rain garden. Wonderful. Oh, thank you, Heather. So Heather's put a link in the chat there about Green Communities Canada have a great rain garden online tour. So that's another resource that you can look at for inspiration, which is great. Okay. So why do rain gardens matter? We've taken a quick look at what they are. And if you'll recall, I was saying that rain gardens are functional, right? They take in water from hard surfaces and they absorb it. But why would you bother? Because rain gardens, since they're a little more, have some more technical requirements than just your everyday garden that you might stick in, the lawn somewhere or something like that, I think it's a fair question. Why would you go through the work of designing something that is a little more technically specific? And the reason is because rain gardens are a really important tool of what we often call green infrastructure. And so what green infrastructure is an infrastructure that sort of uses or leverages or works with nature to serve some kind of purpose. And in urban centers, that purpose is to reduce the amount of stormwater runoff that we create in our urban spaces. And so what you see here is a diagram. And it might be, some of the writing might be a little small. It's okay if you can't actually read everything. And I will say that I'll share these slides also after this presentation so you can take a closer look. But essentially, in spaces that aren't urbanized, we have something called the natural water cycle, where when stormwater, which is any precipitation that falls from the sky, like rain or snow and so on, when it falls on the ground, quite a lot of it is actually absorbed into the soil, into the ground. And it helps restore groundwater aquifers, it nourishes trees and vegetation, which then are also sort of returning water to the atmosphere. A small portion of it does become runoff. And that's fine, right? Like our natural systems are set up to work with that kind of model, that cycle. But in urban places where we have done, we've paved over much of our environment, that natural water cycle is severely disrupted. And so what happens is that when it rains or snows and so on, most of that precipitation, that stormwater, becomes runoff. And that just really disrupts the whole water balance. So, you know, our groundwater aquifers aren't recharged the same way. And that runoff, critically, needs to go somewhere. And so we've designed whole sets of infrastructure, storm sewer systems, that are meant to take in that runoff and take it somewhere else so that it doesn't flood our cities and cause other harms. And in doing so, it picks up all kinds of pollutants, right? So pet waste, cigarettes, chemicals from our cars, all that sort of stuff runs off of those hard paved surfaces into our storm sewers, and usually straight into our watersheds. Very little of urban runoff is actually treated before it moves into rivers and streams. And so overall, this can have lots of negative impacts, which, you know, people are starting to see in all kinds of urban centers. It can cause flooding when there's too much runoff. It can exacerbate droughts. It can harm, you know, aquatic wildlife and all sorts of things. And so what is happening now in a lot of cities, Peterborough included, is a push to try and create more green infrastructure, other ways of sort of managing these problems that we've created in urban settings. And so rain gardens are part of that. They're part of that solution. And I will say that as the engineer, Curtis, too, if you want to jump in here with any other information about the urban water cycle. And
yeah, I can speak a little bit specifically. Like, so in Peterborough, like Hayley's explaining, only 25% of the city of Peterborough is treated by some sort of stormwater management facility. So like we have stormwater management ponds, we have what are called oil and grit separators for smaller site plans that aren't able to provide like the space for a pond. So rather than having these big end treatment facilities, if we can control the water at the lot level where it's being generated from, that really helps us, A, be able to treat water in areas where we currently don't have the infrastructure in place for it, and B, the existing infrastructure that we do have, it requires maintenance. So we have to do regular cleanouts on these ponds and things like that. So if we can minimize the amount of runoff and sediment and pollutants that end up in those stormwater management facilities, the maintenance periods aren't as frequent. So that really helps out too.
Wonderful, thank you. Yeah, for that added context from the municipality. So, for example, so I was just saying that, you know, the urban runoff can cause lots of issues, and at its most extreme, of course, we think of things like flooding. And Peterborough, we are many of us will know quite intimately what kind of damage that can create. The floods earlier in the century. Oh, skipped a slide. Apologies. But most of the time, signs of an out of balance water cycle are far more subtle, right? They're things like a little bit of pooling or ponding, maybe on your property or near your property, because the runoff isn't getting where it needs to go, or better yet, isn't absorbed directly on your property. It can be things like streams of runoff moving over paved surfaces that are carrying with it lots of, you know, chemicals and things like that from, or garbage perhaps from parking lots and paved surfaces. It can also be, you know, manifest in things like low stream levels or high stream levels at different times, and, you know, impacts on the vegetation and wildlife in our creeks, and allow things like invasive species to take hold. So there are a whole slew of impacts, many of which we maybe don't think of on a day-to-day basis, but they are there. And so, like Curtis was saying, rain gardens are a way of managing stormwater at the lot level. So essentially before it becomes runoff that needs to be managed by other types of infrastructure. And the reason that they're able to do this is sort of twofold. So one goes back to that bowl shape. It has to do with, literally just directing some of that water into a big bowl where it has more time to sink in and get absorbed. And the other reason is because a lot of the rain gardens require certain kinds of plants, and specifically plants that are good at taking in large volumes of water at once, but then also handling dry periods between rains. And it just so happens that a lot of those plants also have really extensive root systems. And so those root systems are also part of why rain gardens are good at taking in those volumes of water. And this illustration that you see here, it's showing various different species, many of them native, and just that their root systems are sometimes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 feet long, 20 feet long, 15 feet long. And what happens is that when rain comes in, those roots help channel that water down, and then they also take some of it up, right, to feed those plants. By comparison, what you see in the middle that's highlighted a little bit in yellow is, a conventional sort of sod turf grass, Kentucky bluegrass, and its roots are teeny tiny, right? Like less than a foot. And so it's just not as effective at providing that kind of function, playing that kind of role as other types of plants. And so that's why another reason that we really encourage rain gardens over even lawn. Lawn is better, of course, than a paved surface in terms of absorbing some runoff, but it's not nearly as good as something like a rain garden. And so that is sort of in a nutshell why and how rain gardens are able to provide this really wonderful ecological function and green infrastructure function in our cities. So the main sort of goal with, as we'll talk about in a bit, of this program and of rain gardens in general tends to be their ability to slow down and soak up water and prevent it from becoming runoff. So dealing with it on your own property and on your own lot. But in doing so, there are also, in installing a rain garden, there are actually many secondary benefits that you might not have considered as well. And so one of those, of course, is reducing flood risk, particularly if there are a lot of rain gardens installed within a given area, within a particular neighborhood. In aggregate, they can help reduce sort of localized flood risk, which is really important. They can become low maintenance once established. So there are two caveats there. Low maintenance, despite what many of us want, does not mean no maintenance. There is always going to be some kind of maintenance involved in a living space. And low maintenance once established. So like with any garden, in the first year, maybe 2, there are sort of more requirements to water and to weed and things like that. But over time, rain gardens tend to require less maintenance over time, whereas something like sod requires the same amount of maintenance indefinitely. And so there's that benefit to doing something like this. Another benefit is saving money. If you don't have to water as much, since most rain gardens are designed to not need extra water, then you aren't spending money on irrigation, that sort of thing. They can provide shade, depending on what you decide to put in them and how they're located and designed. A big one for a lot of people is habitat and biodiversity. So by putting in a rain garden, you're going to be adding more species to a given area, providing habitat, so food and shelter and those sorts of things for all kinds of wildlife, especially pollinators, which, for a lot of people is a big interest, and rightly so. They can sequester carbon. So not just trees, but all plants can sequester carbon, and rain garden plants often do a pretty good job of that, given their the sort of amount of plant matter and green matter that they put on, and those extensive root systems again. can be beautiful, so they can add, a lot of visual interest to your property, added curb appeal, that sort of thing. And privacy screens. So again, like with shade, this sort of depends on what you put in them and where they are, but they can have all of these kinds of stacked functions. So they're very versatile sort of gardens above and beyond their sort of main purpose, which is really to function as a type of green infrastructure. Okay, so I've been yakking on, and I think I saw that there was some stuff in the chat. So we're going to take a pause for a second and perhaps take some of your initial questions that you might have. And perhaps I'll actually stop sharing my screen for just a moment so I can really see things. We did have a couple of sort of pre-submitted questions, so some of them might be well suited to here, and I'll ask them. But first, perhaps I can open it up to the floor and see if there are any initial questions that people have about rain gardens or anything that Curtis and I were just talking about. All right.
Don't be shy.
Yeah.
Someone's got to have a single question.
Yeah, all questions are good questions. Okay. I will, I'll give folks a moment to think, but actually one of the questions that we hear all the time is, do rain gardens help breed mosquitoes? Are they mosquito breeding habitats? And so I think that's a good one to address. And the short answer is no. The slightly longer answer is no, as long as they are functioning properly. So all rain gardens, we'll get into this more in a future workshop, are designed in a way that all the water from a single rain event would be absorbed in no more than 48 hours, but ideally actually within 24 hours. And so that is not enough time. That's not long enough for there to be standing water to actually support mosquito breeding. And so, no, they don't create mosquito habitat or breeding grounds. That said, if a rain garden isn't functioning correctly, let's say you have really clay soil and it just is not draining as quickly as you thought it might, or something like that, then that could become a problem, but that's also something that can be fixed and adjusted over time. So that is one question. Are there any other questions from the, oh, I see a question came in.
Someone was asking about the distance 3 meters from your foundation. If you have space between houses with a driveway near several downspouts, 3 meters might not be possible. Yeah, that's true. Like the rain garden, like your property might not be eligible for rain garden. Like if you don't have the distance that you need from your drain to the garden, that's just one of the pre-qualifying questions is, do you have that space? So if you have a really tight lot and you don't have a lot of grass around your area to even put the garden in, you just might not be eligible. So there are instances where that's an issue.
I want to say as well, you could get creative if you have another spot on your property that is big enough for the actual rain garden. You can use different ways, and we can help you with that type of kind of question and type of way to do it, is to actually build something so that you can have your water kind of be funneled or moved to that rain garden location that is far enough away from any other foundations around you. So such a great question. Another question, Hayley and Curtis, that we just had come in is, can you incorporate food into the garden, or is it mainly ornamental plants?
Yeah, you can. I think typically rain gardens do tend to be first and foremost ornamental, but there's no reason why you couldn't put in food plants. The only challenge with that is that, so primarily rain gardens have perennial plants in them because they're working even in the winter, right? Even if it doesn't appear like they are below where the ground is fully frozen and that sort of thing. And so annual vegetables might be a little bit trickier unless they were just maybe small additions but that the bulk of the rain garden was in fact perennials. That said, you could have edible perennials, so those are plants that you can eat and that come back year after year, as long as they're ones that are well suited to the conditions of rain gardens, which is sort of alternating and fluctuating periods of sort of wet soil and then dry soil. And so, you know, there's some that just won't handle those conditions well, but I imagine you could do like certain berries would probably do well, like cranberry and blueberry and stuff like that. And many different kinds of like shrubs and perennials that might get used for like tea and for medicinal purposes. So yeah, so I think yes, they could include edible plants, but you would have to be you'd have to do your research about which ones might thrive in those conditions and which ones wouldn't, I think is what I would say. I don't know, Heather, do you have anything to add to that?
No, that's a really great question. I remember maybe 5 years ago, we went on a bus tour to Mississauga with our friends at the Credit Valley Conservation, and they have been the leaders in this area on green infrastructure and different forms of low impact development that can be incorporated into different spots. And that was a popular question that they were talking about. And so what they said in their research is that they haven't found any reason not to incorporate food from a contaminant reason, like anything coming off your rooftop shouldn't be enough to cause any reason to be concerned about that. And so yeah, the only thing to think about is what Hayley has so nicely explained already. Hayley, another great question has just come through the chat. Could a rain garden be used to manage water coming out of a sump pump, which we all likely have running this time of year, rather than from a roof or a driveway?
Yes. So I don't have my screen shared right now, but when we go back to the screen sharing, I'll make a point of going back and because there was one photo in there that is in fact a rain garden that had a sump pump direct. It was the very large one that I said they can be different sizes. This one's very big. That rain garden takes in water from a sump pump, a downspout, and I think like a driveway or a sidewalk. I can't remember now. Heather, you might remember.
Yeah, it's a sump pump, 2 sections of a rooftop and the sidewalk, all into one garden. So if you have the space around to kind of put multiple inlets, I suppose, into your rain garden, then by all means do that.
You could, yeah. Now, Curtis, I would wonder what that means for the subsidy.
Yes, so as far as the subsidy goes, and I just realized I didn't really give much context for the reason why we need 3 meters distance. So the reason why you need that 3 meters is because you want it far enough away from your house where during those big rain events, you're not creating a bowl right beside your foundation, because obviously that's not good if you have any sort of foundation problems for leaking and things like that. So you want it far enough away from your house that you're not going to have any issues like that. And then with regard to the sump pump question, for sure you can do that, and that's great. Like that'll definitely manage the water coming from your sump pump. But for the purposes of this subsidy specifically, we're just dealing with roof areas. The reason for that is because you're going to get more volume of water captured. Typically, everyone's downspout is flowing. Not everyone's sump pump is always flowing. So we want to get kind of the most efficient use of the garden as part of the subsidy. And it's just easier to quantify to give the funds back to people in order to give some metrics so that we can determine what the subsidy amount is going to be.
That's a great point, Curtis. Yeah, it's really difficult to calculate how much water is coming out of a sump.
Yeah.
So to do that. Speaking of calculating, another question came through about how do we calculate the amount of water coming from a sump pump when determining the size of a rain garden. And so in our next workshop, which we'll post the link for on May 16th, we're doing the kind of design and implementation, and Hayley will be walking us through how we actually measure the size of our rain garden. And so that would kind of be talking about our roof area or driveway area when it comes to the subsidy and those averages, and then also kind of how much water you might perceive coming out of a sump pump would also be part of that. How big do you make your rain garden? So join us again to find the answer to that question, or email us and we'll let you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I also, what do I have here? I actually have a question that came in by email Oops, sorry, I just lost it. So maybe I'll. Do rain gardens need to be set back from the road at any distance? And I think the question might be specific to in order to qualify for the subsidy.
Yeah, so you need that 3 meters distance off your foundation, and then you also have to be installing it on your own property. You can't install it in the boulevard. The reason for that is, say we come through and someone's putting in a bell line, or we have to do a water main repair, something like that. It's city property and there's city infrastructure in the boulevard oftentimes. So for that reason, it's going to stay on your property and be your garden.
Okay.
One more question, Hayley, that we had come through is it difficult to build a rain garden? Are we walking into something that we just is going to be really difficult if we don't already have a green thumb?
So no, I think as long as you are taking the time to sort of think through your rain garden and making sure that you follow some basic steps, and this program is really going to help walk you through those steps. So things like making sure you're calculating your roof area correctly, making sure that, you know, that inlet is higher than the outlet. There are a couple really critical features like that that are important to get right. That said, none of those things are in and of themselves super complicated. I would say installing a rain garden, particularly if you're doing the work yourself, can involve some labor, absolutely, but it isn't necessarily challenging or difficult to get right or to design something right. And as we'll talk about more at that May 16th workshop, that is going to be the opportunity where we're really going to explain each of those steps involved. And, you know, myself and Curtis will be available for that kind of like one-on-one stuff, right? So at some point, if you're applying for the subsidy, like you need to submit your actual design to us. So we'll be able to help sort of troubleshoot and figure out or anticipate if, you know, maybe there's something that you haven't gotten quite right or something that might pose a problem down the line and stop that from even happening. So is it difficult? No. In terms of the physical sort of work involved, it depends on the size and the scale and all those sorts of things, but it's not that hard. Often it can be done with just hand tools. You know, if you're so inclined or want to do things like hire excavators and so on, you're certainly welcome to, but for the average size residential rain garden, there's no reason that you can't complete it in, you know, a couple of days with some help from some family members or some friends, recognizing, of course, that that is a little complicated at this precise moment, given COVID-19. So the rain garden, I helped friends put in a rain garden last year, and it took us two pretty leisurely, well, not leisurely, but 2 days that we didn't sort of break our backs trying to get it done really swiftly. And that was a pretty decent sized rain garden. It was about maybe 3 meters by about 1.5 meters. So it is pretty straightforward. And if you've had any experience sort of planting gardens in general, a lot of the principles still apply. Things like, you know, how to appropriately, you know, dig a plant into the right depth and so on. But even if you don't have that experience, we can sort of help walk you through that a little bit. Virtually, we can't actually come and help walk you through it, unfortunately. All right.
I did post a link to Green Up Sustainable Urban Neighborhoods Planting Guide. This is something we put together a couple of years ago. It's a great resource if you just aren't a planter, aren't a gardener. That's okay, no judgment from us. It kind of just helps take you through that step-by-step process, not necessarily of a rain garden, but of gardening in general. And check out the back pages. There's a great resource for plants and kind of what can be planted where and what it needs. So as you're doing your designs, that's a really helpful resource.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Okay, well, maybe we'll move on to the next part. I'll share my screen again and move on to the next part of the presentation where, you know, we've sort of preface some of this stuff already with specifics about the subsidy program, but Curtis and I are going to walk you through a little bit more what's involved in the program, eligibility, and all those sorts of things. So bear with me for a moment. And actually, I am going to go back before I forget and show you that rain garden. There we go. So this rain garden here, this large one next to this white house, this is the one that's taking in water from multiple surfaces. And I believe it's next, the little, you can see the tiny little inlet, perhaps, maybe, oh, maybe you can't see it, but it's just sort of near that boulder. That is where the sump pump is entering the garden. So there you go. There we go. Okay. All right, so I will pass the floor to Curtis for a minute, and he's going to tell you a little bit more about the program.
Yes, so kind of the nitty-gritty of how the program is going to work. So applicants are eligible to receive up to $500. That depends, A, on the roof size that you're capturing, and B, on how big you make your garden. There is kind of a minimum standard for how big the garden has to be for your roof area that you're capturing, because we don't want the garden constantly overflowing. We want it to be able to control your regular day-to-day rain events. So when you do the pre-approval, there's actually a section there where you can size your garden, you put in your roof area, and there's also an aerial tool there. That's some of the feedback we got last year was some people had a hard time with the aerial tool. So if you're having any problems with that at all to get your roof area, and you'll see what I mean when you go to do it, there's an instructional video there, and we're always available to reach out to if you guys have any issues with that. So once you've kind of determined your roof area, you can set your dimensions for your actual rain garden. And we didn't want to make it unattainable to get the maximum subsidy amount. So like we're seeing on the slide here, the average subsidy that we reimbursed last year was $433. So a lot of people got the full $500. It's not out of reach. It's not one of these programs where it's like, oh yeah, they say $500, but I can't actually get $500. So we made it pretty easy to get it. Just one of the specifics too is it doesn't go towards tools, like it goes towards the actual material that you're going to be using for your rain garden. So different substrates that you're going to be putting in, like the actual vegetation that you're going to be putting in, sand, soils, things like that, any stones, stuff like that. So that's what will be required. And yeah, you just have to fill out, there's a questionnaire that you have to fill out that I think we're going to go through in one of these next slides here, but it just kind of determines if you're eligible. So it'll run you through, I think it's 10 or 12 questions, just so that you're not wasting any time going through the whole process if you're just not eligible. So things like, are you at least 3 meters away from your foundation? Things like that. So you can probably just go to the next slide and we can maybe go through some of those details. So yes, the pre-approval part. So you're going to choose a suitable location. So typically it would be flowing down from a downspout from your roof, 3 meters away from your foundation. You're going to complete the pre-approval questionnaire, which we're going to go through in a moment here. You're going to calculate your roof area, which is basically just a length and width calculation. And it's actually the area is generated for you automatically using the tool. So you just click, 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 and it spits out the square meters for you. And then, yeah, just put in your dimensions of your garden, and then it'll actually generate your subsidy estimate live on the pre-approval page there. So you'll know exactly what you'll be expected to get. We can go to the next slide. All right, and then after you've been pre-approved, there's the actual application process. So this is an informational session right now. There's going to be a spring mandatory workshop, which where we go through like the actual technical details of how to put in the rain garden. There's also going to be a fall one. So once you've completed that, that checks that box. You're going to calculate the slope on the area of your proposed garden. There's also an application guide that we have available to refer to. So that goes through all these items as well. But it's basically just a simple calculation of getting a tape measure out. You measure up off the ground to make sure that you have slope draining away from your property. It can't be too steep, can't be too soft. You kind of want a decent amount of flow going into it, and then enough that'll be captured by that bowl shape before it potentially outlets. Then you're just going to complete your proposed rain garden design. There's a sketch template there that you can draft your design on, and that's where you'll be putting things like your plant species, the size of the garden, where the inlet's going to be, where the outlet's going to be, referencing where the downspout is, things like that. So it's a very easy sketch to do up. And then you're going to submit the package. So really, it's just going to be two things. So you're going to have that aerial that you do with the tool that's online, and then you're going to have this design sketch that has all the other information on it. That's all. You just upload that, and then we let you know from there if you're good to go. Go to the next slide. And then, yeah, after you've done the application and you've been approved, you'll be instructed to go ahead and put your rain garden in. So as long as you install the garden within the same calendar year, you're fine. And we just want you to take photos before, during, and after. Just a little bit of a, we don't want people just saying, oh yeah, I put in this rain garden, so I would like my $500 now, please. So just some sort of acknowledgement that, okay, here's where we were before and this is the garden after. And then you just submit your receipts outlining the different materials that you use, the stone, the sand, the vegetation, things like that. And then we just give you a check.
That's great. Let's see, next slide. So, can't remember if that was I going to do this one, or Curtis, do you want to?
I can do it. Yeah, that's
okay.
fine. Yeah, so this just kind of gives more context to what we're talking about as far as the direction of water coming from your downspout. So again, like I said, you don't want to be digging a bowl right beside your foundation. So you want a little bit of distance between your rain garden and your house. And on the left graphic there, you can see where the downspout is. You want the water to flow overland into the rain garden, get captured by the rain garden, and then during heavy rain events, it'll spill over and away from the rain garden like it normally would if the garden wasn't there. But the idea is to capture as much of those day-to-day rain events before they end up in your curb and gutter and eventually into the storm sewer network. So yeah. The other one, just the slide or the picture on the right, you obviously don't want to put the rain garden there, and you don't. If your lot grading looks like that in general, you have a problem. But yeah, you just don't. You want the water flowing away from your house to the garden, and then away from the garden.
All right. That's
and
great.
This is just a good slide of a perfect. Yeah, it's a perfect example of where to put in a rain garden. There, you have lots of room. You have your slope away from your house, and yeah.
Yeah, and for some of you might have noticed that this is in fact the house with the really big rain garden that has water coming from the sump pump. So this was it prior to having a rain garden in there. One thing I did want to mention, you'll see in the eligibility that you can't put a rain garden like directly under a tree, the drip line of a tree, because that would interfere and sort of put the tree at risk. It almost looks like that's what's happening here, but it's actually not quite. The tree is, well, actually the tree is no longer there, but it's quite a distance from the house to begin with. So if your rain garden is outside the drip line, which is the sort of maximum sort of width of the tree, then you should be fine. As far as the subsidy is concerned, doesn't mean you don't have to be careful about working around trees still, because some roots can make their way a little bit further, but yeah, so, and the slope is very much on display there. Okay. Curtis.
Yes, so part of the pre-approval I was just speaking about, if people aren't familiar and everyone's like, what is this pre-approval, where do I even find it? So it's actually on the city's website. If you just even Google City of Peterborough Rain Garden, it'll pop up. And then on the main page, you'll see a clickable text there for pre-approval. So once you go to there, you'll see this questionnaire. First question, are you a resident of the City of Peterborough? This subsidy is for people in Peterborough, so that's a no-brainer. Do you own the property you wish to install the rain garden? Currently, we're just basically offering it to people who own the property. It gets a little bit dicey when you start to deal with landlords and things like that. If you have a tenant that's going to move into a property and they want the rain garden, even if they got their landlord to sign off on it, who knows, the next tenant might not take care of it, and you just kind of get into some sticky scenarios. So you have to be the owner of the property. Do you have a disconnected downspout that flows to a low-lying area of your property? So that's just, you need a source of water from your roof to get into the rain garden. And like we just talked about, you want that water flowing away from your foundation into the garden. Do you have 3 meters of space between your home's foundation and the low-lying area? Again, like we spoke about, you don't want to be putting a bowl right beside your foundation because that's just not a good idea. Is your proposed rain garden location clear of all trees and underground services? So we're going to talk about this, I think, later in the slides, but you don't want to be putting this garden in over a fiber optic cable or something like that. You don't want to be hitting a water service or something like that. So you're going to have to do a call before you dig, but we'll talk about that later. So you just want to be free of all that. You don't want to hit your sprinkler system with your shovel. It's just good practice to check what you're digging into. Is the proposed location for your rain garden relatively flat? So you don't want to have a really steep slope because then you're not going to capture any water. So you want to be able to put the garden in a location where you're able to get that bowl shape so that it actually does collect that water. It doesn't just flow right out of it. Do you live in an urban area or subdivision? So the whole purpose of this subsidy is to provide that lot level control like we spoke about. So the idea drain the water before it ends up in the storm sewer network. Basically, every subdivision has lot grading where the water, even if it's in your backyard, that's still fine because eventually it's going to get to your rear lot swale and into your side yard swale and eventually end up on the road and into the catch basin in the storm sewer network. So as long as you're in some urban area, if you're out in some farmhouse that just has a ditch line somewhere, that's not really eligible because you're not contributing to the storm sewer network. Do you know which sections of your roof flow to the downspout? So yeah, this one is, you need to have an idea of what the roof area that you're capturing in order to determine how much water is being captured by that roof area. So you kind of have to walk the perimeter of your house and have an understanding, okay, so that section of roof flows into this eaves trough, that eaves trough flows into this downspout, so that when you're doing the online tool, you can section off the roof that you're trying to capture. And that's it, I think, for that.
All right. Okay. Well, there we go. Sorry, I should have switched the slide for you.
Yeah, that's all right. I don't even know which of these slides are next sometimes, so it's hard to. Okay, so yeah, sizing your garden, calculating the roof area. So this is an example of what the online tool looks like. So like I said, this is a good example. You know that the roof section on the left there is going to the downspout on the left. It's being captured by those eaves troughs. So you just pick the 4 corners of that side of the roof and that will spit out your area. So in this case, you have an area of 51.2 square meters. And then the tool also has some other functionality where you can just do some measuring and some squaring off, and it automatically spits out the measurements for you. So in this case, we have your 3 meter offset from the foundation that's shown there, and then your rough location and dimensioning of your rain garden. So it's literally 4 clicks to get your roof done, 4 clicks to get your garden done, and you just make sure you're 3 meters away. And that's all you have to do with the online tool. It's pretty simple.
Wonderful. And I think it might have already gone in the chat, the link to the video that you can also see on the screen, but
yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
So yeah, I made a tutorial video, so you can literally just pause it, do a step, pause it, and I walk you through how to do the entire thing.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. All right. Excellent. Determining the size of your garden. So best practice, and so this is coming from, sort of rain garden experts, best practice on sites that have, or soils that have good drainage, is to try and make your rain garden 20% of the chosen roof area that you want to divert or absorb. And on sites with poor drainage, so often those are like clay soils, it's better to go with 30%, just because it'll take longer for that water to soak in. That said, that sort of best practice size is not necessary to receive this subsidy. The subsidy is calculated differently and uses a different threshold. I'm just sharing it with you there because that best practice size means that you can take in what is anticipated to be, the most of the runoff from an average rain event. It's just well sized to take in that without, having it immediately sort of overflow into the storm system and so on. A lot of properties are not going to work out in quite the way that would, allow you to do that, and that's fine. So don't stress if your front lawn is very small and it just can't accommodate 20 or 30%. That is fine. What is important is that you don't make your rain garden deeper than 0.3 meters or 30 centimeters, so roughly a foot in the center. And that too is just to make sure that you don't have so much water sitting there that it just stands for too long, right? We want it to be able to absorb within a certain amount of time. And I'll move on unless Curtis, you want to add anything there from the subsidy perspective.
No, I think you covered it. It's just we didn't want to make like the best management practices are obviously ideal, but we didn't want to make it unachievable for people to install rain gardens. You're better off to have a smaller rain garden than no rain garden. So
yes, yeah, absolutely. And it's better, oh yes, and thank you, because that's what I forgot to mention. It's actually better to go smaller than bigger, because if you go bigger than the ideal size, you're at greater likelihood of some of those plants not getting enough water, full stop, and just not surviving as well. So yeah, so that's just there for you to know, but it's best practice, not required. But you might be thinking, how on earth do I know if my site has good drainage? For some folks, it might be very obvious. Maybe your lawn doesn't hold any water, or your property doesn't hold any water, or perhaps you see pools of water all the time that never seem to go away. Those are kind of the two extremes. There is an actual way to figure out how quickly your soil drains water, and you are going to be required to do this during the application stage of the subsidy program. But before that, before you do any digging of an infiltration test, as it's called, you do need to obtain utility locates. And so, like what Curtis was saying, you absolutely don't want to be sticking a shovel in the ground and then breaking something underground, causing harm. Not only is it can it be dangerous if it's something like a gas line or anything like that, it can also be quite costly. So it is actually the law to obtain your utility locates before you dig on your property. And the fines for not having done this, if you do accidentally cause harm to utilities, are kind of staggering, actually. So it's important that you do it. And this is also something that I'm more than happy to help you with, because it's not the most intuitive. It's easy and it's quick and it's free, but it's not the most intuitive thing in the world. You either need to call or go online to Ontario One Call, and you have to enter in all the information that they ask for. So it's things like address, which intersecting streets, how deep you're going to dig. You actually need to sort of mark off, if you're using the online approach, map off where you're planning to dig, how you're planning to dig. So is it an excavator, is it with a shovel, etc., that sort of thing. They will send back to you a whole series of emails from each of those utility providers letting you know if it's clear So if it's fine, and then in many cases, they will actually come to your property and they will spray paint. They'll mark off where the actual utilities are, if there are utilities in that general vicinity. So this is a really important thing to do, and we can talk about it in more detail on May 16th for sure. But also, if you find it difficult and you want some help, I'm happy to, get on Zoom or something and we can screen share and I can walk you through doing it. It does take a little bit of time. It varies, but right now the spring tends to be peak time, and so it can take a little bit longer. Sometimes you can get them within a week, but often right now it's good practice to sort of plan 2 or 3 weeks in advance of when you want to start digging, just because volume is high at this time of year. But for reference, I actually just made a request for utility locates on Sunday for something I'm doing at my place, and I've gotten like 80% of them back by now already. So it's actually still moving quickly, but I might have to wait a few more days for the last couple. So do that first before you do an infiltration test to figure out whether your site has good drainage or not. I'm going to move pretty quickly through this because we're going to go over it again on May 16th, but also because I sense that there's a whole lot of questions now, so I want to leave enough time for those. But essentially, infiltration test or drainage test is really just a fancy way of saying you dig a hole and you fill it with water multiple times and you watch it drain, and you see how long that takes. And it's not hard. It's not hard. It just can be time consuming, especially if you have clay.
Very scientific.
Very scientific. I like to say it's actually a great activity, especially if you have kids who you need to keep occupied. Yeah. You can fib a little because like you can actually leave and then come back and measure it, but you could tell them that they absolutely need to sit there and watch that water drain for whatever it is, 2 hours if you want. It's actually kind of fun, but essentially in the application guide, the PDF, it does sort of step-by-step lay it out, how big the hole should be. You fill it up with water, or if it's just rained and the hole is quite clearly saturated, then you don't have to do the first sort of fill up or whatever, but you fill it up twice and then you measure in intervals how long it takes for that water to drain. And then through the city's application materials, you can sort of plug in your numbers into a little very, very easy math equation. And then it'll tell you based on your result on a chart whether you have fast draining or slow draining soil. Now that said, most people in Peterborough have fairly fast draining soil. However, there can be exceptions, especially if, say, you live in a subdivision where there might be more like infill that was brought in that is perhaps more clay-based. That could be one definite exception, but more often than not, you're going to be on the fast draining side. Okay. Yeah, so not just a good thing actually to occupy kids, but I forgot about that. Math is a good math practice if that's something you want to do. All right, so the next steps, as we've been saying, if you haven't already done it, is to, if you're interested and think you have a site rain garden that would qualify, is to complete that pre-approval process and find out for certain. If you aren't sure, and I know, like, don't feel bad, don't hesitate to get in touch if you're like, I really just don't know if my site works or not. Contact us, because honestly, like most properties are going to have some weird little quirk that makes it sort of difficult to know right off the bat. So we're more than happy to help you figure that out a little bit more, whether it's photos and that sort of stuff. Curtis, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, it's when you read the application guide and just hearing us talk right now, it sounds a lot more complicated than it actually is. So definitely reach out to us, phone call, whatever, email. And we're available. We can't do house calls. We don't have the capacity to do that, but we can get a lot done over the phone and via email. So,
absolutely. And then, yeah, the step sort of after that, well, you don't have to have finished the pre-approval process before the design and installation workshop, but you'd probably find it useful to have done so at that point, is to attend one of these. So like we said, attending one of the 2 design and installation workshops is mandatory in order to receive the subsidy. The first one is coming up not this Sunday, but next Sunday from 2 to 4 p.m. With a full session to follow. Now that said, I know, a date and time is never going to work for everyone. If you absolutely cannot make it, let us know and we will figure out an alternative for you. It is being recorded as well, similar to this one. But we do really encourage, if you can make it, it really is great to be there, because it is quite a lot of information and a great opportunity to ask questions sort of in the moment. And I can guarantee that almost everyone there will have the same questions as you. So it will be lots of fun, and we'll do lots of sharing of more photos and stories and experiences.
What else are you going to do anyways?
Pardon?
No one can do anything anyways, so you might as well.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, hopefully the weather is terrible that day and no one will want to be outside. Come join us at the workshop instead. Okay. Resources. So I will share these slides with these links. I think Heather has also, however, put already quite a few of them into the chat. And then yes, more questions. All right. I have a feeling a whole lot of questions have come through, and I think if you give me 1 minute too, I'm going to grab that question from Leslie that's in my email as well before I forget.
Thanks, Hayley. I've been gathering everyone's wonderful questions. There's some great questions coming in, and I've kind of just been categorizing them a little bit so that our Q&A can flow. But as new questions pop up in your mind, please don't hesitate to pop them in the chat, or if you really want to speak out loud, just, throw your hand up or give me a reaction emoji, and we'll give you the mic. So the first kind of set of questions, I think, Curtis, are coming your way. And more about the subsidy itself. And then we're going to move into some kind of qualifier questions, and then moving into some more Hayley focused questions on kind of rain garden bits on their own. So first off, great question. How many up to $500 grants are available this year? So is there a race to the finish line?
We have the funds to do 50. So it's first come, first serve. But I do not see us getting to 50. So I wouldn't be scrambling to get everything done. That would be great if we could get to 50. But yeah, it's not too time sensitive. You have some time and should be okay.
Great, thank you for that. And then a couple questions about like outsourcing, sort of hiring out for the rain garden. So if somebody was hiring a landscape company to do the project, does the $500 go directly to the homeowner? And then can they put that towards the company expenses?
Yeah, so that would still qualify. Yeah, the only thing that doesn't qualify really is like tools and things like that. But when you're going to hire someone, they're going to use materials. So if they can just put on the receipt, give you like a breakdown of the materials that they use to complete the project, that would satisfy the requirements.
Perfect. And an extension of that, and Hayley, you may want to play a little bit into this question as well. So if we were hiring somebody else to do this work, do we really need to, as a homeowner, know about the design? Do we still have to be part of that design checkmark process, or how's that going to work?
So in terms of, Curtis, correct me if I get this wrong. In terms of qualifying for the subsidy, I believe that if a landscaper is doing the design and installation on your behalf, they need to attend, right?
Correct.
At minimum. That said, I think it would be ideal if the homeowner could also attend, mostly because understanding how your rain garden is built and designed and functions will actually allow you to maintain it. I think have a better understanding of what's involved in maintaining it, and have a better understanding of being able to tell if something isn't working quite right, and knowing if something needs a tweak. So I do think it would be ideal if both parties could attend, but it would be required of the person or company who is actually installing the rain garden to have attended. That said, Curtis, if someone attended last year, like a landscaper, that would
Yeah,
fulfill
like you would
the
still have to
requirement?
do some of the pre-approval stuff and the application stuff because you still need to show your roof area and your garden and things like that. But as far as,
Mhm.
yeah, if attending a workshop, if you have like a pre-qualified landscaper that did attend the workshop, as far as installing it, that would meet that requirement. But I don't think you're going to find a landscaper who's going to do the aerial tool for you type thing. So that part would still need to be done by you.
Yeah.
Unless you do, maybe you do. Maybe they walk you through how to do it, but I doubt it.
Niche
Yeah.
service on the part of different landscapers. You never know. Wonderful.
Great. And as I think as Green Up as well, I think when it comes to the final design, we'd still like to see that just to double check the species and make sure that it's not having anything invasive or anything that's perhaps not appropriate. We love our landscaper friends around the region, and we're not doubting them one bit. It just allows us to sleep a little better at night to see and also learn a little bit from them too. So we kind of really do want to see those designs ahead of time. All right, so speaking of that, another question we have about the subsidy eligibility is exactly what expenses are eligible for the subsidy. So what are we actually looking to hold on to the receipts for, and what receipts can I allow to get lost?
Yeah, so just literally almost anything that's not a tool. So if any plants, stones, sand, topsoil, all of that counts. As long as it's something that you're putting into the ground, it's eligible. We just don't want people going out buying a shovel and saying, look, pay for my shovel. So that's kind of the only requirement you have to meet.
Great. And if you do happen to need a shovel, let us know, because Green Up has a bunch. We don't mind lending them out. And there's also a lovely tool library in Peterborough that has lots of tools that people can borrow as well. So if that's a barrier, talk to us and we can hook you up with some places for that. Moving into kind of spaces, a really interesting question, and I'm really excited about both of these next questions. But many homes in Peterborough are newer subdivisions and are closer together with smaller lots. So if there's a couple neighbors who want to work together and kind of connect their downspouts into a connected rain garden, can they do that? Would this be counted as one rain garden or two rain gardens?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. I think last year actually we had like a neighbor that's drained their roof onto their neighbor's property. It wasn't even their roof. Like the person who applied, it wasn't even their roof. It was their neighbor's roof. So the person who owned the property made the application, but the water they were gathering was from their neighbor's property. And that's why it's beautiful, because if you have issues where your neighbor's constantly flooding out a section of your yard, what a great opportunity to solve that problem right now, right? And then as far as, I guess, like the idea of having maybe two roof sections that go into one downspout, I think you would have to determine, if you could, which property the garden's going to go on. If you can, it'd be difficult to have an application from two people. So you can do that for sure, and you can outline the two roof areas and then them going into the property. But I think you'd want to try to keep it on one side of the property, as far as where you're actually going to put the garden, if you can. If you can't, reach out to us, and this is flexible. Like, we can work with it. But yeah, so.
Yeah, that's really exciting. I know there's been folks we've chatted to in the past who really wanted their neighbor to work with them on that, and their neighbor wasn't interested. Let us know if you need some resources or anything to share with your neighbors. I think that's great if you want to tell your whole neighborhood about what you're doing and why it's awesome and why everybody should do it too. So thank you for that. Another really cool space that we haven't talked about is schools. Curtis, would a school be considered for the subsidy?
No, we're keeping the residential properties. It's something we might consider in the future, I guess, but for right now, no, we're not doing schools.
Awesome, thanks for that. If you are a school that's really interested in rain gardens, though, come talk to Green Up, because we have put in some rain gardens on some schools, Westmount Public School and St. Anne's. So who knows what we'll do in the future. So reach out to us so we can put you on our list. Another great question is regarding liability. So, you know, if we don't have a lot of space and our garden is maybe going against the sidewalk, how do we ensure that our liabilities are safe when we kind of approach that sidewalk? What if somebody twists their ankle? Is there insurance in place at the planting sites and events for this?
Yeah, so there's not really any insurance or anything like that. As far as it being on your property, like if it's on your property, there shouldn't really be too much of a trip hazard. There, if you're a certain distance away from your house and you're still on your property, I don't think anyone's going to walk off the sidewalk into the garden. But there's not really any insurance from our end. It's your garden at the end of the day. It's on your property. So is there anything else, any other type of landscaping you're doing on your property? This is the same thing.
That's great. Thank you, Curtis. A few rain garden specific questions we have coming in. When we dig out the bowl for the rain garden, so Hayley, this might be going more to your direction, do we put any soil that we cannot transplant to our own property in green waste? So if we take it out and there's excess, what do we do with the excess?
Right, okay. Yeah, that's a good question. So when you're building a rain garden, one thing we haven't necessarily talked about in the structure of a rain garden is that they often have what we call berms. So slightly raised sides that help direct the water in, or form the bowl, so to speak, and sort of direct the water from the inlet to the center and then to the outlet. And oftentimes it can be a great practice to minimize waste if you take some of that sod and soil and material that you're excavating from the center and use it to berm up the sides. And with any luck, it evens out and you don't have any waste or excess. That said, nothing's perfect. Sometimes you do have too much. So there are a couple options there. I think as much as possible, it would be good to sort of shake off and save as much of the soil and use it in that garden space as you can, or perhaps other spots on your garden. If you compost, you can break up sod and soil and toss it into your compost. That's definitely something you can do. But of course, if we're talking about material on a larger scale, I don't want to say the wrong thing about whether or not, I'm sure you can put just salt, like just grass in yard waste, but it would get very heavy very quickly, and so you'd probably tear bags or have to put out quite a few bins. And I'm actually not sure whether they will accept really soil-based, like if it's little bits of sod with massive chunks of soil, whether that is still qualifies for green waste. I don't know. Heather, do you know? or Curtis or anyone?
We may have to give our friends over at Waste Management a call and just find out more about that.
Yeah, I'm not
from
sure.
Our projects, we've never had to actually take anything away because we've reused it. So when you come back for the design, we'll talk a little bit about that. Usually it's nice to kind of reuse as much of the product of your soil that's native to your spot as possible. And not bring in a whole lot of new stuff if you can help it. Kind of use that soil, cut and compost, put that back in. But we've used the sod and the other bits to help form the structure of our berms that we're using in the kind of beautiful sculpting of the gardens. So we've never had that happen where we've had excess to dispose of. So solid question. We'll put it down in we'll put it in our bike rack and find out more specifics about that.
I mean, I will add, I mean, ideally it wouldn't go to landfill just because as an organic material, I'm sure they'd accept it, but as an organic material, it will not do a great job there and create lots of methane as it breaks down and so on. So it's not ideal, but yeah. If you're really, like some people have, if you want to be really careful, be very, careful about rolling up sod, and we'll just reuse sod somewhere else if you can keep it in good shape too. But yeah, good question. Okay, sorry, I'll stop because we're flying. It's almost 8.
Hayley, you had mentioned about the drip line of a tree. So how do we figure out the distance a rain garden needs to be away from a tree?
So that drip line is sort of your first tool, right? If you it's a lot easier once things have leafed out and budded out. It's a bit harder this time of years for deciduous trees. But if you go and take a look at the tree and sort of walk around and sort of draw either a literal line with like a hose or something, or sort of in your mind where the edge of those branches are coming out, you can for the purposes of the subsidy, as long as the garden isn't coming under that circle, that line, or that area, you will be okay. And so there isn't any one distance, I guess is what I'm trying to say, because it depends on the size of the tree. Outside of the drip line is what matters. That said, there are a lot of trees where roots do extend beyond drip lines. And so I mean, I want to hear what Curtis has to say from the subsidy point of view, but from the like tree protection and well-being point of view, it doesn't mean you can't have a rain garden if you discover a small root somewhere, but you do have to be pretty careful about digging around a root and considering that. And it depends on the species of tree. It's the short answer is there's no short answer, and it's sort of case by case. So if that is a concern or is something you're not sure about, definitely do get in touch. But yeah, Curtis, do you have more thoughts?
Yeah, the intent isn't to really damage trees by putting in a rain garden. So as far as like specific species and things like that, I'm not exactly sure on what the allowable offset would be. But we don't want to be removing trees or impacting root systems or anything like that as part of this program. So ideally you would pick a location that's offset from a tree enough so that you're not impacting the root systems.
Yeah. And one thing I'll add too, I mean, so again, it depends on the size of the tree. If you just so happen to have like a fairly new tree that's still very small and very young, its roots aren't going to be as developed or as far out yet. So you could locate that garden in a way that right now it doesn't interfere with the roots. You're not injuring the tree by installing the rain garden, but in fact, over time, that tree may in fact benefit from having that rain garden there and being able to access more of that water as it grows and gets closer too. So the trickiest situation is usually the one where you have a really large mature tree. Particularly if it's something like a big cedar or a big Norway maple. All of those tend to have shallow and very widespreading roots that can be significant. So if that's you, get in touch and we'll take a look at your property and see what's possible.
Thank you. There's another question coming through about putting your rain garden right against the sidewalk. Curtis, is that what you mean by keeping it on your own property?
Yeah, so typically your property line would be at your water box normally. So typically that would be offset from the sidewalk sufficiently so that you're not going to have any tripping hazards. But it's on your property, it's your rain garden. So as far as getting insurance or anything like that through the program, there's nothing that we're offering. So we're not encouraging people to install the garden right up to the sidewalk. We're encouraging them to keep it on their property. Yeah.
And I believe that on the aerial tool, one of the layers on there is in fact the property lines, is it not? So you'll be able to see where yours ends also.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if you're that tight to the sidewalk, like if you have a house that's only a few feet off, you're not going to have enough room on the frontage of your property to put in the rain garden anyways, because you don't meet the 3-meter rule. So in that case, if you are that tight to the sidewalk and you don't have that space, I would recommend putting the rain garden in your backyard potentially, where you do have the room for it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think also what it can do is if we're having that coming right against a sidewalk, you could see also a degradation of that infrastructure, and so you don't want to be dealing with that.
And again, that's why we look at all of these and we review these as a case-by-case basis. So if we do see any red flags like that, we'll be making note of it during the review process.
Mhm.
Yeah, so not to worry. You can't make a huge mistake and muck something up that you're going to fully regret, because we're there to find those red flags and help you solve them. So that
we look at all these individually. Yeah.
Mhm. I do.
Oh, sorry, Hayley.
I was just going to say, I do see that it's 8, and I don't know how many more questions there are, but maybe
2 more.
Since 2 more, okay. Well, we're recording too, so I know if folks do need to leave, that's okay. You can just catch up on the last few questions, and I'm more than happy to stay for a few extra minutes and tackle questions.
The next question should be really quick as well. So if your rain garden is fed by a rain barrel overflow, does this exclude you from this subsidy? And I would say, and Curtis, correct me if I'm wrong, no, what you're actually going to do is still calculate the roof water that's coming down from that downspout. And whether it's the overflow of your rain barrel doesn't matter, because that water is still eventually going to come through that area. So if you're taking it in a rain barrel and using it elsewhere, it's still absorbing in the ground somewhere. So I think that still counts.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Awesome. Thank you. There was a question about whether we have reached out to the local landscapers, and we have reached out to local landscapers to invite them to be part of the process. One is joining us here today. So if you know others, if you want to invite them, want us to reach out to them, just let us know. We'd love for landscapers to be here from the get-go so they can tell their customers and work with us on this. So that's great. And one more question did pop in. I don't know, I'll ask it. Can it be 3 meters from a house with a covered deck, or is the covered deck with the 3 meter where it starts? It's all about where your foundation is. So if there's a covered deck that's just above ground, there's no foundation there, then it's 3 meters from the foundation. So hopefully those are some quick answers to those questions. If you have any further questions, I'm gonna pop Curtis and Hayley's email in the chat, and mine as well. And you can reach out to us at any time if you have further questions.
Oh, yeah, Leslie.
Sorry. I'm just wondering if the landscaper comes to this one session to learn about it, does that qualify him or her for all the gardens they may do this summer, or do they have to go to the mandatory meeting every single time for every single property? Or does the one time this gentleman or woman is with us tonight, are they now qualified to do rain gardens anywhere in the city for the season?
Yeah, I think they will. As far as for this subsidy specifically, I think once they do their workshop, they get their little certificate. We're doing certificates, right? Yeah. So, and then once they have that visual representation, like I attended the Green Up workshop, they don't have to attend it every year now. And they're covered for multiple people. If they want to install it in multiple people's homes, then they're covered for all those ones too.
That's great, because I was thinking if they had to attend every single time, that would really inflate the cost of
Yeah, and also I feel like it would also just deter people from wanting to do it too. So
yeah, exactly. Thank you. Oh, before I turn my mic off.
Yep.
The tree bylaw is on Monday night's meeting.
I know, it's exciting.
So pay attention.
Yeah.
Okay, and then you get to speak to it at the end of May. So just want to let you know, it's something I've been fighting for. I haven't read the report yet, so I know it's a compromise. That's all I know. But have a read, please. Thank you.
Wonderful. That's great. Okay. And I did see just one more question come in from Summers, their digital certificate they can post on their website. The certificates last year were digital, and I don't see why you couldn't put it on your website. Unless Heather or Curtis can think of a reason that you couldn't. But yeah.
There's also some other great Green Communities Canada is doing another rain garden masterclass, which Hayley and I have both attended in the past. That gives you a more formal like rain garden knowledge certificate outside of just the subsidy, because our certificate's really just that you've joined us for the subsidy. So that's something maybe to think of as well if you're really interested in really getting into installing rain gardens more actively. And email us and we can give you the link with our friends at Green Communities Canada if anyone is interested in that. I believe it's $200 to register.
Great. Whew. Thank you, everyone. So many good questions. Glad to see so many people were able to make it out. And we'll also, like I said, we've been recording this, so we will share that recording with you, and I will also share the slides, the slideshow as well, for your benefit. And then if if you decide that you'd like to sort of move ahead with the subsidy, or you're just keen to learn even more about rain gardens and their construction and installation, please do join us for the May 16th workshop. Like we said before, it really is, like, as much as possible, we really encourage people to be there. If you have a conflict that truly makes it impossible, do let us know, and we can get you that recording and make sure you're able to participate in the workshop that way. Anything else?
Yeah, if you haven't done so, like, the pre-approval doesn't mean you're committed to it. So just maybe check out the pre-approval right now, walk through it, see if you can figure out the aerial tool. You should be able to, but if you can't, we're here. It's not a commitment just to do the pre-approval. It's just kind of like a, maybe I'm eligible, maybe I want to check into this. And then that'll give us more information to be able to help you better, because we'll have an idea of like who you are, what you're doing, what you're planning. So that could maybe help you along and make it less intimidating.
Awesome. All righty. Well, we'll let everyone go while there's still the tiniest bit of light in the sky, and we look forward to hearing from you soon.
Thank you
Bye,
so
everyone.
much.